500 years before Columbus, a group of Norse explorers stood on North American soil, face to face with people that they'd never imagined existed. This encounter would be recorded in Viking sagas, confirmed by archaeology, and it would end in a way that changed the course of history. What happened when Vikings met Native Americans? The truth is stranger than any fiction. Most people think Christopher Columbus discovered America in 1492. But here's what they don't teach you in school. Vikings had already been there, lived there, and interacted with indigenous peoples half a millennium earlier. And we have proof. Today, we're uncovering one of history's most fascinating first contact stories. This isn't speculation or theory. This is documented history, backed by archaeology, Norse sagas, and scientific evidence. Let's dive into what really happened when two worlds collided around the year 1000 AD. Our story begins with a man named Leif Erikson, son of Eric the Red, who had already established settlements in Greenland. Around the year 1000, Leif heard tales from a trader named Bjarni Jofsson, who claimed to have seen unknown lands to the west while blown off course. Leif was intrigued. He bought Bjarni's ship, gathered a crew of 35 men, and set sail westward from Greenland. After days at sea, they made landfall on the coast of North America, likely somewhere in modern-day Newfoundland, Canada. The Vikings called this new land Vinland, which translates to wineland, named for the wild grapes they found growing there. They also explored areas they named Helgeland, meaning land of flat stones, probably Baffin Island, and Markland, meaning forestland, likely Labrador. But Leif Erikson wasn't alone on this continent. The land was already home to indigenous peoples who had lived there for thousands of years. The Viking sagas call these people Skrulings, a Norse term that simply meant foreigners or barbarians. We now know these were likely ancestors of the Inuit, Bealfik, or Mi'kmaq peoples, depending on the specific location of contact. The first encounters were probably cautious. Imagine the scene: Norse explorers in their distinctive clothing speaking Old Norse, encountering people who had never seen Europeans before, and on the other side, indigenous peoples encountering these pale-skinned strangers arriving in massive wooden ships. According to the saga of Eric the Red and the saga of the Greenlanders, written down in the 13th century but describing events from around 1000 AD, the initial meetings were peaceful, even friendly. The sagas describe trade between the two groups. The Norse offered red cloth and milk products, which fascinated the Native Americans. In return, they received furs and pelts. Both sides were curious about each other, trying to communicate despite the massive language barrier. One saga describes Native Americans arriving in skin boats, likely kayaks or similar watercraft. The Vikings were impressed by their craftsmanship and knowledge of the local environment. But here's where things get complicated. The sagas also describe growing tensions. Cultural misunderstandings were inevitable. The Vikings didn't understand indigenous customs, and the Native Americans had no framework for understanding Norse culture. According to the sagas, violence eventually erupted. The accounts describe conflicts where both sides suffered casualties. One saga mentions a Native American being accidentally struck, which led to retaliation. Another describes a full-scale battle where the Norse were outnumbered and overwhelmed. The most famous story involves Freydis Eirik's daughter, Leif Erikson's half-sister, who allegedly scared off attackers despite being pregnant, though this story might be embellished. What's crucial to understand is that the Vikings were vastly outnumbered. Unlike their successful settlements in Iceland and Greenland, which were uninhabited, North America already had established populations who knew the land intimately. The Norse also faced other challenges. They were thousands of miles from home, with limited supplies and no reinforcements. The Native Americans, meanwhile, were defending their homeland and had every advantage: numbers, knowledge of the terrain, and established supply lines. For about a decade, the Vikings attempted to maintain their settlement at what we now call Land's Ox Meadows in Newfoundland. Archaeological evidence shows they built typical Norse longhouses, worked with iron, and attempted to establish a permanent presence. But ultimately, they couldn't sustain it. The combination of distance from Greenland, conflicts with indigenous peoples, and the harsh reality of being a tiny outpost in a vast inhabited land made the settlement untenable. The Vikings abandoned Vinland and returned to Greenland. Unlike their other settlements, this one didn't last. And here's the fascinating part: this encounter had almost no lasting impact on either culture at the time. For the Norse, Vinland became a story, a saga, a place that had been visited and abandoned. For the indigenous peoples of North America, these strange visitors came and left, probably becoming part of their oral histories. It wasn't until 1960 that archaeologists Helge and Steiningstad discovered Land's Ox Meadows, proving definitively that Vikings had indeed reached North America. The site showed clear evidence of Norse construction, ironworking, and artifacts matching 11th century Scandinavian materials. Carbon dating confirmed the settlement dated to around 1000 AD, exactly when the saga said it happened. This was the proof the world needed. Vikings had reached America 500 years before Columbus. But here's what makes this story truly remarkable. It has a tale of two perspectives that we are only now beginning to fully understand. For centuries, we only had the Norse side of the story through their sagas. Today, archaeologists work with indigenous communities, combining written records with oral histories and archaeological evidence. Some indigenous oral traditions speak of pale strangers who came from the sea long ago, though connecting these specifically to Viking contact is difficult after so many centuries. What we do know is that this was a genuine first contact between peoples who had evolved completely separately for thousands of years, to technological traditions, two ways of understanding the world. To complete societies meeting for the first time, the Vikings came as explorers and potential settlers, bringing their iron-working technology, their ships, their cultural practices. The Native Americans were established inhabitants with their own sophisticated cultures, technologies adapted to their environment, and complex social structures. Neither side could predict or control what this meeting would mean. In the end, the Vikings left, and North America continued on its own historical path for another 5 centuries, until European contact resumed with Columbus and those who followed. So, why does this story matter? Because it challenges our simple narratives about discovery and exploration. The Vikings didn't discover an empty land. They encountered a populated continent. They didn't conquer it. They couldn't sustain a presence against the realities they faced. This story reminds us that history is full of complexity, that first contacts between cultures are always multifaceted, and that the outcomes of such meetings depend on countless factors: geography, numbers, resources, timing, and simple human interaction. The Viking attempt to settle Vinland failed, but it gave us one of history's most intriguing what-if scenarios. What if they had succeeded? How would history have been different? We'll never know, but we can appreciate this brief moment when two worlds truly met for the first time. If you found this fascinating, hit that subscribe button. I explore forgotten chapters of history, the stories that challenge what we think we know, and the human moments that shaped our world. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.